Hi, welcome to World in a String Designs. I'm Alicia. Thank you for joining. Today I'm going to be talking about snow dyeing yarn. So I live in Maine and it's very cold here and we get a bunch of snow lately and I am so over winter and I was really salty about it. But you know what? When life gives you lemons, you make lemonade. And I didn't have lemons, I had snow. And what I did instead was make pretty yarn with my snow by snow dyeing it. I did happen to have some acid dyes on hand from a previous project, and when I recently went through and quantified and cataloged all of my stash, I realized that I did have a bunch of undyed yarn. So I have pretty much everything I needed with the snow to do a snow dyeing project. Here we are about to do some snow dyeing. So I have my yarn here. I have some Knit Picks Stroll Glimmer. I have a bin that I'm going to use to pack the yarn with snow and apply the dye. I have this old crock pot. So this was destined for the dump. And I forget why. I believe the answer is the lid is missing. And I think it took some damage to the point where it was no longer suitable to cook with. I just didn't think that I would have a need for a crock pot without a lid. When I'm cooking, I like the lid on there, right? It keeps things from evaporating. So just by chance, this didn't make it to the dump. And so it cannot be used for food once I put dye in it for yarn. So this is now has a sole purpose of non-food type activities, or it goes to the dump, one or the other. I think I want to do a mini. So I have this little remnant and I think I'm going to line that up into a hank and then weigh it and make sure that I have enough for what I want to do. So this is my setup, and then I have some dyes that I did not have the foresight to take out yet. So we will get started on this and then we will dye some yarn with snow. So that now has a note written on the side in Sharpie that says not for food, and that crock pot will never be used for food again. That's a very important detail. But there are other ways you could heat set your yarn. You could put it in the microwave. The yarn I had has sparkles in it. So it has stellina, which is, I think, technically a metal. So I would not put that in the microwave. But if your yarn doesn't have any metallic components, probably just fine to put in the microwave. And you could do it in the oven, in a tray. Again, make sure you're using a tray that is not going to ever touch food. Some people will use the aluminum pans. That is an option, but one of the problems with that is the aluminum isn't terribly sturdy and acid eats metal. So you'll probably get pinholes in your tray, and then your water and your dye solution might leak through. So if you're going to use a disposable aluminum tray, I would recommend putting some other kind of tray underneath it to catch any drippings, because you don't want to make a mess and you don't want acid dyes baking in your oven, the next time you use it to cook in. So the first thing I want to do here is pre-soak the yarn. So I am going to fill the basin with some water. We're going to add some vinegar, and that is going to give it an acid. The acid is going to help the dye strike the fibers. So we want to have it nice and wet so that the fibers are open and ready to receive dye. And because we're using snow, it's going to be like a slow strike. A hot strike would be when the water's hot and the fiber's hot when we apply the dye. However, because this is snow, it's going to be cold when it touches it. So this is definitely going to be a slow strike process, and it's going to probably result in something that's a lot more muted for colors. So that's something that we'll keep in mind as we're doing it. However, when you snow dye something, it is quite random, so it's very difficult to plan, and we're gonna keep that in mind, and this is just for fun. So the first thing I'm gonna do, I'm gonna take this yarn, I'm gonna put it in this bin with some vinegar, and we are gonna let it soak. this at least 30 minutes. We'll come back after it's had some time to set up, and then we'll drain the water and pack it with snow and then apply our dye. So basically I put my wet yarn in the bottom of a bin, laid it out very nicely, and then I packed snow on top of it, and then I sprinkled dye on top. And you can mix it up into liquid form first, or you can just sprinkle the powder dye. And that's what I did, was with the powder dye. I didn't really have a lot of, I wanted to use a lot of colors, and I didn't have a lot of like squirt bottles to make it down and apply it. If you make it down with water, you're going to tend to get more dilute colors. So you're already diluting the dye in the liquid, and then the snow is melting and producing more liquid. So you're going to get a little more dilute coloring if you make down your dye into liquids. And if you use just the powder, you'll get brighter colors, and they're going to be more irregular, probably. It's going to be pretty random. Either way, it's going to be pretty random, because as the snow melts, it's going to do what it wants, and it's going to hit that yarn randomly. And there's more of a chance that you'll have more intense colors and more diversity of color if you use the powder. Another thing you can do, if you don't happen to have acid dyes in your house like I did, you can use Kool-Aid. Kool-Aid already has citric acid in it, so it's already acidic in the powder form, and that's a great way to do it. And then you don't have the concern about, is it touching something that touched food? So I highly recommend doing this with Kool-Aid. I just didn't happen to have any Kool-Aid in the house, but I did have the acid dye. This was a very impulsive project. Here is the soaked yarn, and I've removed the water. We're about to pack it with snow, and then we will put the dye on top of the snow. And I did forget to dunk this, so I will dunk that and pack that with snow later, but we'll let the mini soak while this is underway. My plan is just to put the mini in the pickle jar. It'll dye up differently, which I think actually will be pretty cool. And I think I'm going to go for sort of more of like a little semi-solid with maybe a little bit of sprinkles on it, or speckles rather. And then I'm actually going to put the pickle jar right in the crock pot with the yarn when I heat set it. And I'll do like some metal rings on the bottom or something to raise it up so that we don't risk breaking the glass. But that's where we're at. I'm going to go fill this up with snow. All right, we have our dye applied to the snow. So this will melt pretty randomly is kind of the idea. You can see it kind of starting to melt and work its way down. This is pretty freshly applied, so this has not been in here very long. And I pretty much took shades of pink and orange and coral and those shades and applied them in strips. And I did take out the yarn. Oh, I guess you're probably not going to be able to see it. I didn't want it to just sit on the bottom and pull, so I actually took some mason jar collars, rings, and put them on the bottom and put the yarn on that. So hopefully it'll sit out of the water a little bit. I don't mind having white spots. If that happens, that's fine. But there's that. We're going to wait for that to melt. I did take and dunk my mini, and we'll give that like half an hour to soak, and then I'll do the same with that. I'm not sure what I'll do for color though. I'm tempted to do sort of a I don't know, maybe an aqua would look kind of nice, or maybe I'll stay within the same color scheme and maybe do like a cranberry or something like that. Or, yeah, I don't know what I'll do. It'll be a surprise. But I do intend to put only one color of dye in that mason jar, so it will be more of a semi-solid than a variegated. And no, maybe I'll just take the darkest shade that was here and do that one. That actually seems like that'd be cool. So once this has fully melted, then I will take it, squeeze out the excess water, and then we'll warm it up and put it in the bath to heat set it. And then we'll be back. A few things to note here. You'll see how very close to the sink I am because I don't want to stain my countertop. I have put paper towels down. I used a plastic spoon. I have gloves. I'm still wearing the gloves. I rinsed the gloves and the spoon and dried it completely in between each different color of dye that I applied. And if you do happen to get a little bit of dye on your countertop, these magic erasers work wonders to get it off. But this is very messy. Actually, if it weren't so darn cold outside, freaking winter, I would be doing it outside. So if it were a little more mild day outside, that is exactly how I would be doing it. And just so you know too, like with the dyes and the vinegar and not having a lid for this thing, I may end up putting that crock pot outside. So we shall see how that goes, or in the garage or something, if it gets to be a little too noxious. But we shall see how that goes. I am super excited to see how this turns out. You can actually see some of the dye is making its way down already. Not too far here. And I can't wait to see how this turns out. Once I got it all packed up, got my dye applied, and then the waiting game began. And it was a hard waiting game because I just was very excited and wanted to enjoy this project, and instead took forever for it to melt. So it took, I want to say, close to 16 hours to get it to melt. Once it was fully melted, I did give it a quick rinse in the sink, and then I put it in the crock pot, again with a few glugs of vinegar, and then I turned the crock pot on high, and I waited for it to get warm, and then I gave it about 30 minutes. And what I do to test whether or not the dye is taken up is I'll take a little spoon and I'll look at the water. So when you first put your dyed yarn in your bath to heat it, so I would take a spoon and I'll scoop up a little bit of water, and I'm looking to see that it's clear. So once it's taken up all the dye from the water, then the water is clear or close to it. Once the dye has set, then I take it out. Again, I rinse it under the sink in some cold water until it runs clear. And then I squeeze as much out as I can and I hang it up to dry. Now I use superwash yarn, so you may want to be a little more careful if you're using non-superwash yarn, because if you shock it with temperature, it will felt. So you'll want to heat it up slowly, cool it down slowly. You'll want to make sure that you're not exposing it to any very quick temperature changes, and you don't want to agitate it too much either. So if you're trying to wring it out, you want to be careful and just try to press it rather than wring it. Another thing I did do, I thought it'd be nice to have a contrast color. So I did have some ends on a cone, and I didn't really know how much it was, but it looked like it was probably enough for a mini. And what I did is I took the darkest color that I had applied, and I did that in a little pickle jar. And so I put in the soaked undyed yarn, and then I just sprinkled in the one color on. I packed it with snow and I sprinkled it with the one color. And then I put the pickle jar right in the crock pot with the yarn, but I didn't want the colors to mix. So what I did is I put some canning rings that you use like on a ball canning jar. I put a few rings on the bottom and set the pickle jar on top of that. And that way the jar is not going to break from being, if the bottom of the crock pot gets too hot. So yeah, basically I had the two things in there, and we baked them up and cooked them. And then several days later, I got to see what it looks like when it's dry. And it's fabulous. So this is what I got. And I can't really tell if it's focused until I review the footage later, so hopefully this is coming out all right. But this is just, it came out gorgeous. So I did probably 7 or 8 colors. I took, I think, every shade of pink and orange and everything in between that I had and threw it all in there. And I wanted them to mix a little bit as they melted down from color to color. But I was hoping that I'd get a few distinct colors in there, and that worked out very well. And it's just gorgeous. And here's the mini. Not sure, I can never tell until I'm editing how the light, how this comes out with the light, because it always looks a little more washed out looking at the screen than I think it is. But hopefully you can see that. And I do think, because I used several different shades, some of them were a little warmer and some of them were a little cooler. And so I do think that the mini came out a lot more of a cool shade, where I think that overall the entire skein is probably more neutral to cool. I mean, sorry, neutral to warm. So I'm not quite sure how well the mini matches, but you can kind of see, like right in here was the same color, but it just would have mixed with other dye in that snow dye process, whereas this one was just the single color that got applied. So you can buy undyed yarn many different places. Some dyers will sell undyed yarn, so it's usually their natural colorway, or they might just call it undyed. You can get some from Knit Picks. There are, and I think indiedyer.com maybe. So there are places where you can buy undyed yarn, and grab yourself some and get even just some Kool-Aid. Like, acid dyes take a little bit of a learning curve, and like I said, that's just what I had on hand, but I totally would have used Kool-Aid if I had it available. And actually, that was a project that one of my kids did. For a kindergarten teacher, for a present, a teacher present, I knit up a cowl that my child picked out the pattern that they thought the teacher would like. I knit up the cowl in natural, and then my little one picked out a color of Kool-Aid that they liked, and we dyed it together in the crock pot, and then they gifted it to their teacher. So that was really, really cool, fun project. And you don't have to get that involved with it, but you could always, you know, dye the yarn first and see how you like the color and what project you think suits the color. But yeah, like, this is absolutely like a great project to do with kids. This is a great project. And if you use the Kool-Aid, like I said, you don't worry about, you know, any chemicals touching something that you might use in the kitchen. But give it a try. We'd love to hear if you tried this before and how you liked it. And I will definitely say that this made my snow day 1,000 times more enjoyable. So I think if you are inclined, you might also want to give it a try. Thanks for joining me. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we'll see you in the next video.